Hi everyone, and welcome to this CresFest world. My name's Neil Adam. CresFest is an annual music festival which takes place in Creswick near Ballarat in country Victoria. The podcast features interviews with some of the intriguing people involved in the festival. The next few podcasts all feature artists who are booked to play at CresFest 24. This podcast, episode number 7, features an interview with Gerry and Richard Klein, two members of T-Bone, a New Zealand band focusing on Cajun and other roots Americana styles. T-Bone are one of the major acts appearing at CresFest in 2024. It's time to get your tickets online at cresfest.com.au. As you'll soon hear, Gerry and Richard have had incredible lives in traditional music, intriguing histories, but as you'll also hear, the conversation gets really serious in the second half of the podcast as we start to talk about their other passions, food and drink. You'll hear Gerry and Richard sharing with you a current favourite recipe. You'll need a pen and paper for that opportunity. These guys really know their stuff, whether we're talking about their lives in music or their lives in the kitchen. I know you'll love hearing from them. I started off by asking Gerry to describe the band to me, and we soon got talking about their New Zealand Folk Album of the Year from 2023.
T-Bone, where do I start? We are definitely a bunch of all sorts here. I moved back after a long period, about 15 years living in Ireland and mainly touring around the world with different folk bands. I came back to Wellington and was like, what's next? And I met Richard Klein at the Wellington Folk Festival, and he made an amazing gumbo. And that probably should have set the theme for musically what we were up for as well, a different assortment of tastes that came together. And he had delicious Italian red wine. And so we got together. I was house sitting in Eastbourne, just around the corner from where Richie was living at the time, and we started having weekly jams. And then we ended up meeting Dusty Burnell, didn't we, Rich? You introduced me to Dusty and said, you got to meet this guy, you got to have a jam with him. And then we ended up forming the T-Bone Trio. I'm not sure if you've ever, many of your listeners have played in a band with a double bass before. Well, once you've played in a band with a double bass, it's very hard to go back to being in a band without a double bass. Aaron Stewart is just fantastic. Very great musical sensibility, just tasty, puts everything in the right place, doesn't play too much, doesn't play too little. He's just amazing. And we invited him to have a jam with us, and then he was in the band too. And then Dusty went off touring with the Frank Burkett band over to Europe. And we were sort of trying to think what we do while Dusty's away, because he's a really key part of the T-Bone sound. And we found a young man with rich musical heritage called Michael Muggeridge. And Mike can play the mandolin and guitar, and he's a champion singer, and he can basically play anything. And when Dusty got back from his sabbatical, we enjoyed Mike's company so much, and we felt too bad to kick him out of the band again. So we just said, why don't we all stay in the band, you know? So that was kind of an interesting process, working basically from a 3-piece to a 5-piece, and that's how it stayed. Yeah, so we have great fun together. We really enjoy playing music, and we enjoy food and wine as well. So what better combination?
That's a great combination, Gerry. Yeah. Richard, tell us about the album of the year, the New Zealand Folk Album of the Year.
The album was actually recorded, notwithstanding the geographical challenge. That is that Gerry and Dusty actually moved up to Northland, which is, if you were to drive, it would be what, about 12 hours or 10 or something?
Yeah.
And anyway, so I mean, yeah, they're way up there, and then the rest of us are down in Wellington region. We did get the spirit of the band, which was generally always about having a really good time, frankly. A lot of times our practices, when I lived in Wellington, I had a little flat up in Brooklyn. In fact, one of the first songs, or one of the songs is about the band, the T-Bone Rag, and it kind of describes the energy and the vibe, which is most of the time we got together and cooked some food and drank some wine, and then music would happen, generally speaking. Sometimes the food and the wine took over. But we met on a regular basis, and really for the crack, as they would say.
I was born in Ireland, and I moved over to Aotearoa when I was 6. So I grew up like at the Irish club here and down in Wellington and Lower Hutt. my mum's a beautiful trad singer, so I grew up backing her on the guitar and learning some of the nuances of the trad music and the repertoire. So then as soon as I turned 18, I was back to Dublin, landed into playing about 10 gigs a week in Temple Bar, as much free drink as you could have, learning the 5,000 odd tunes you probably need to be a trad guitarist backer,
Yeah.
And then then I met Alan Doherty, who's my best mate and an amazing flute player, and we formed the band Grada. And with that band, we were very lucky. We toured through Australia 4 times and played a lot of the great festivals around Oz. But we did about 1,500 shows and played music in 30 countries. And it was just amazing being able to travel the world and doing what you love, really. Through that process, we ended up playing a lot at festivals around America, and nearly every bluegrass festival or performing arts centre would have their honorary Irish band or an Irish group as part of it. I mean, the music have a lot of ties. And bluegrass music and old time music, you can hear the links back to Ireland and Scotland as well.
Yeah.
And actually through those playing around, met the wonderful Tim O'Brien, which is when I first met yourself and Judy. Yeah, and so I was very lucky to play on a few of Tim's albums, and he also produced a Grada one. But back in Ireland, after Grada finished, and sort of during its last couple of years when we were, kind of tapering it down a little bit, I was really lucky to meet who'd been one of my childhood heroes, Sharon Shannon. And I'd grown up listening to her music in New Zealand and joined her band for a while, which was an amazing experience. And ended up playing with all sorts of people, but it's just Ireland's so amazing. The traditional music community is pretty tight over there, and there's just music is everywhere. And it's one thing I really miss, actually. I love living in New Zealand, and I'm proud to be half Irish, half Kiwi. But I miss going into a pub and just hearing music break out, and could be some of the best known musicians in the country that will be there jamming. And there's something amazing about that.
Which is exactly the experience that we had. We've spent the last fortnight in Edinburgh and around there, where my family is from, and where my sort of musical. I don't know, where I learnt my musical chops, a bit in the same way you're talking about arriving in Dublin. And, you can go to 2 or 3 sessions any night of the week in Edinburgh at the moment. I know it wanes and it, flourishes. And it's absolutely flourishing at the moment. And with the really good friends that we have there, there'd be all kinds of conversations in the afternoon about whose session we were going to go to, and off we would go. Just played some fantastic spontaneous music in bars.
It's amazing. And the other thing I love about it is it mixes demographics. You go into a session and there's the 18 or the 15-year-olds that are playing with ferocity and speed.
Exactly.
Older musicians that have been playing for 60 years who join in and play with them. And there's something lovely about that. That sort of socializing in the scene, which is brings different people, different demographics together, and so it was just fantastic. But I mean, during that time, that's what I did, played music, and then but was fortunate then to arrive back in New Zealand and end up playing with Richard, and then being introduced to Asian and music, Zydeco and music from New Orleans, and which I'd heard in passing before, but I'd never really played a lot of it. So that was pretty awesome too.
Yeah, which might lead us very beautifully and nicely into asking Richard exactly the same question. So Richard, you and I have known each other for a long time, and right from the start there was always that great interaction between professional restaurant running and food manufacture and that incredible background.
Yeah, once upon a time I was American. That's no longer the case, except I still have the accent, apparently. I have only one blue passport, and that says New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Anyway, I was born and raised on the east coast of the States, and in a very definitely non-musical family, but somehow, at least at the time, 70s, when you were, in school, well, 60s and the 70s, actually, from elementary school, they forced you to play an instrument. I guess they just had to have a band and an orchestra at school. So you had to play an instrument. So I started on the double bass and I loathed it. I hated it. I think possibly because I'm really bad at maths. And most of the time we were counting, rests, like 40 measure rests. So at some point I rebelled, broke away, and I said, I want to play the fiddle. Now, why? I really don't know. I think I just heard fiddle music, whatever. And on recordings or whatever it was, didn't really have any live influence, but somehow knew I wanted to play the fiddle, and going to the school library and listen to these old 45s of whatever, Woody Guthrie and anything I could get my hands on, and just got into fiddle music. But like I said, I couldn't really, didn't really get to hear much live. But anyway, when I was around 16 years old, I met a fellow who became a great influence on me. And he lives in France. His name's Andy Arleo, and he was from the same place I was. And he was the first person I met who could play a fiddle tune from start to finish. And I was about 16 or something, 17 maybe. He was 20. He'd gone off to France and married a French girl. And anyway, came back to visit his mother. And he had a profound influence on me. And so fast forward a bit, in 1977, when I was just before my 20th birthday, I took off to travel the world with my fiddle. Now, I had worked for a number of years to save money. I was a printer, and I'd saved quite a bit of money for the time and my age. And the first place I went to was Cape Breton Island. And then after 6 months there, I crossed over to the UK. And then I went to Ireland, and I showed up in Ireland in the middle of the winter. They thought I was completely mad, and of course I probably was. Showing up in the middle of the winter in County Clare, it was freezing, with this fiddle on my arm and no place to stay. And I had some amazing adventures, and I got to, hang out with the locals. And of course, music is the greatest passport in the world, So I traveled at the length and breadth of Ireland and the British Isles, pretty much everywhere. I went to the Outer Hebrides, the Inner Hebrides, up to Orkney, to Shetland, all over the place, and I had some extraordinary encounters. And I taped a lot of this stuff. I taped all the time on this crazy little Sony, handheld cassette player. And I still have these tapes, and I got them digitized. And I realize now that it's quite a legacy. I really haven't listened to them in a long time, and I've forgotten so many more tunes than I ever learned. But anyway, the fiddle music was the driving thing. And then at one point, well, to be honest, actually, before I left the States, I heard someone sing with the fiddle, and that was the epiphany. And that someone was none other than Mike Seeger, and it was a folk festival. And I was maybe like 18 years old, and I heard Mike Seeger and Tracy Schwartz from the New Lost City Ramblers play this music I never heard of, and it was Cajun music, and there was two fiddles and two voices, and I said, that's it. That's what I want to do when I grow up. I've never grown up, but I've learned a few Cajun songs along the way. I copied a tape of the Balfour Brothers, and this was when Cajun music was really starting to explode in Europe, in France and the UK. So that was a thing. Like I got this thing. I don't know. I was a singing fiddler. That was my angle.
Last week, I had a conversation with Christine Hoy, who is a great friend of mine over very many years. I played for years with her sadly passed away husband, Derek, in bands and so on.
Oh gosh!
And she told me how many people listened to your recording of Tony Cuff from 1977. I'm going to say, but I don't know if that's the right year. Which you sent to me to have a listen because I knew Tony very, very well, and I sent it over to his family, and it's now up on a website called raretunes.org. And it gets a lot of listens, Richard. People, it's one of the few places where people, if you want to hear Tony Cuff playing casually and sweetly and talking about his music, you go to raretunes.org and you listen to the interview, really the bit of recording that you did of him in 1977. It's a lovely historical artifact.
making me tear up. I had one name. It was Sandy Bells. I had it written down in my diary, which I still have here on the shelf. Sandy Bells. And within like 2 hours of arriving in Edinburgh, in the middle of the winter, it was January. Within 2 hours of arriving, I was in Sandy Bells in this steaming hot session. And in that period there, I met my heroes, which was Ali Bain and the Boys of the Loch. And traveling with the fiddle, that's kind of what happened. Same thing. I went up to Shetland. And anyway, suffice to say, I traveled for a long time with the fiddle. And it was in Shetland I discovered Swedish music. I'm fast forwarding a bit. There's a lot of stories within it, but I discovered Swedish music. There was a gang of Swedes. We connected. I got their, whatever. Back then we used to write postcards. It was BC, before computers, and before COVID, long time. So I sent postcards, and I said, I'm coming up to Sweden. And I sent a postcard from Greece, and then like 4 months later, I show up, and I, stayed with these people, and they took me to this insane thing called the Spelmansstämma. It's a fiddle festival, and so I went like hook, line, and sinker into like Swedish fiddle. Although I loved it, I couldn't play it, but I loved the sound. So that's an influence for me. So suffice to say, I followed the fiddle. I tried to learn tunes wherever I went. I busked a lot. And I guess it was, the American stuff, the old folk songs, and which kind of were always a common denominator of what I did.
Yeah, well, my great love since I've been like knee high have been fishing and music, and then from the age of 8, I started playing the guitar, but from the age of about 4, then we went to spearfishing.
Right.
And it was one of the things that drew me back. Yeah, and part of the reason why I moved to the far north of New Zealand now, because we're living in the Bay of Islands, and the coast around is just so beautiful and really plentiful with Klein moana, with our fish life, Kai being the Māori word for food and moana for the ocean. And so I love cooking fish, crayfish, shellfish, and actually going back to what Richie was saying earlier about our Monday nights in Brooklyn at his flat in Wellington, and I'd try and bring in a bit of, whether it be a bit of paua or kingfish or crayfish or scallops or whatever, and then we'd cook that up, and Richie would have usually some pasta or some veggies. That he had a fantastic garden down there, and he'd whip something up, next thing all the pans were firing, and he was throwing stuff around the kitchen, and of course loads of fresh herbs and that. But probably one dish that I've been making that I'm buzzing over, because sometimes my wife and daughter eat so much fish, like 4 or 5 days a week. It's hard to get them excited about it. But I found a dish recently that she gets really she gets really excited about. So I usually use trevally, which I think you get over in Aussie, don't you?
Yep.
So trevally is a beautiful raw fish. It's best to use it within, I would say 3 days, probably of it being caught, if you're going to eat it raw. But what I do is I chop up the trevally fairly finely, like at about maybe inch long sections, and anything to sort of half an inch or a little bit less. And I cut up maybe half of a fish or a good bit of a fish, and then it's basically like ceviche. I put it into a bit of orange juice, a bit of castor sugar, and red onion, and I put that aside and let it marinate for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the thickness of the fish and how well whoever I'm cooking it for likes it cooked, and then. What we've been doing is, meanwhile, make a bed of kind of, not quite a guacamole, but a mashed avocado bed. And you can, chuck in a bit of lemon juice, salt and pepper, a few chili flakes and that, and put it on a big plate and basically spread the avocado out. And then once you've done like 20 minutes of the fish cooking, pour off the juice, and then spread the raw fish over the avocado. And then on top of that, I like to chop up some cucumber, some fresh coriander, some red chili, some like slices of avocado across the top, and then drizzle it with olive oil, lemon juice, salt and pepper, and then serve it with a plate of corn chips. So it's almost like becomes like raw fish nachos,
Wow.
But it's
beautiful.
It's so easy, and it takes about 20 or 30 minutes to make. And everyone, like, even we had it for Christmas Day this year because I managed to shoot a big trevally when I was down in Wellington at Carpety Island.
Oh, I was in the wrong place on Christmas Day, Gerry. I was in the wrong place on Christmas Day.
And
Richard, with the 5 minutes that we've got left, can you talk us through a bit of a recipe?
I'll talk to you a recipe with a very quick wine note. Okay, so the recipe is right now. I'm overflowing with zucchini, as many people, anybody who's got a garden and plants at least one zucchini plant, you have way too much. So I came up with this idea of like basically making a pasta sauce using your excess zucchini. And it's very simple. You just use an abundant amount of olive oil in a pan. You cut the zucchini in chunks. I often scoop out the seeds if they're a bit larger because you just don't want those seeds in there. So you just, anyway, chunks of zucchini. I would start with some leek or scallion or shallot first. And then I would put in the zucchini and just basically just keep tossing it in a pan. At which point, once it's starting to get soft-ish, I would add some water and let it soften up. And then I throw in a good few handfuls. If they say we start with 4 zucchini, medium size, I would use 2 good handfuls of basil leaves ripped up. Don't really cook the basil down. It's just like you turn it off, turn the fire off, throw in the basil leaves. Then you get a stick blender or a food processor, and you just basically liquidize it, puree it as it were. Or you can put it through a mouli if you want. And you throw in a couple handfuls of grated Parmigiano or Pecorino cheese. A little bit of salt and pepper if you want, but it's really the basil that comes through. This makes a crema, which is just gorgeous. All you have to do is put it in a pan, cook whatever favorite pasta is, and toss it in it. A little bit of grated cheese on top and some more basil, and it just turns this quite banal zucchini into something lovely. Wine match. Suave. However, we'll go for the varietal. It's called Garganega. That's the grape. The wine typically made of it is called Suave. It's actually one of the oldest white wine varietals of Italy, and it's led to many other grape varietals. It's a really interesting white wine. I won't say a brand, but just go for the varietal. Suave Garganega. With vegetables really works. Also works with fish. There you have it. Bon appetit.
Absolutely perfect, Richard. Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for your time, both of you. That's been lovely talking to you, and obviously can't wait to catch up. Looking forward to it so much.
We can't wait to get to CresFest and just to jam with the other artists there. Here we're staying somewhere in the middle of town, close to all the venues. So we'll be the guys at the end of the night, and they'll be kicking us out. We'll be learning tunes off some.
Look, I can think of the venue for you. There's a place in the middle of town called Lever's Hotel, the Odessa Bar. And that is the place where when everything else stops, it kicks on.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's what we get off on anyway at festivals. And yeah, can't wait to get over to Oz. It's going to be a real highlight of 2024. I've got that feeling.
As you can probably tell from that conversation, I'm very fond of Gerry and Richard. Great guys, most unexpected kind of characters. So the conversation morphed. I hope you enjoyed it, from the conversation about music, which is such a big thing in their lives, to food, which actually is something which is a bit bigger.
So come with me, my darling. Come with me tonight. I'll lead you to the northern skies where the moon is shining bright.
The next podcasts will involve some more interviews conducted from a distance with these artists who are going to be flying in to take part in CresFest 24, and I know you'll enjoy those as well. For the meantime, thanks for listening and see you next time. This is Neil Adam. Bye bye.